Everybody, this is Blake here. Where is my hair? I do not know. If you've seen it, though, please tell me because that fucker owes me some money. Um, anyway, me and my Twinkie Maker. I had to get this when I was going Christmas shopping. I'm going to give it to somebody. I have no idea who yet, but I think that's hilarious that they made this, and I could not resist buying it. So me and my Twinkie Maker, we're going to review The Hobbit to the Desolation of Smaug. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that name right. I'll just be referring to it as the dragon primarily. For many people, The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey was an unexpected disappointment. But to what extent varied from viewer to viewer. Now, when the Lord of the Rings trilogy came out, people were pretty split. Many thought it was three of the greatest movies of all time. Many thought there were at least some of the greatest movies of their chosen year. And others thought they were good, but not as great as everybody said they were. And then, of course, you still had a few people who felt strongly that the Lord of the Rings movies just weren't that good to begin with, and they were really bored throughout watching them. As for me, I loved The Fellowship of the Ring a lot. I loved it so much that I read all of the books and was really eager to see the subsequent films, and then I was subsequently disappointed. I thought The Two Towers and Return of the King were good, but whereas most people believe that there were improvements, albeit slight improvements, over The Fellowship, I'm the total opposite. I thought The Fellowship had a stronger narrative. I thought it had a more interesting world to explore. The Two Towers and especially The Return of the King, they were more about armies clashing and stuff like that, which was cool, but I preferred the more smaller scale adventure of The Fellowship. I liked that it explored the more exotic worlds of Middle-earth, from the Dwarvish lands to the Elvish lands to the Shire, whereas the subsequent Lord of the Rings films were more about the human areas of this world, and the human lands were just kind of boring. They looked more like New Zealand, whereas, the various forests they'd go through in The Fellowship, I felt like I was in a totally different world. But with that said, also I liked the narrative in that The Fellowship just focused on a small group of people. The numbers changed here and there, but it followed them throughout the entire film, whereas the other films, they broke it up into 3 different stories, and I just didn't care for that as much. And it's strange because I was really cool with it with the books. I actually felt that The Fellowship was the weakest of the original novels, but in terms of the movies, it was just the total opposite. But I still think that The Two Towers and Return of the King, they were good movies. I did like them, but The Fellowship was more my kind of film. But when The Hobbit came out, almost everybody unanimously agreed that it was inferior to the trilogy, that it had a lot more problems, that it was more slow and boring. Now, the pacing has always been a bit of an issue with the franchise. The original trilogy was leisurely paced. They knew when to speed up, they knew when to slow down, but it went by its own rules in regards to the pacing. Whereas The Hobbit was much more slow. Slow pace does not automatically just mean boring. It means that it's emphasizing mood and atmosphere, and that's what the film was going for. But I will admit that it just kept that slow pacing for too long, to where, there were times when I wasn't just impatient for it to move along, I was just getting flat out bored. And I also felt that it had more objective flaws than the trilogy did. The characters, I thought, were kind of boring. I can't even remember the majority of their names, which granted was a problem with the source material too. And I felt that, the story of The Hobbit was much more small in scale compared to the Lord of the Rings story. That dealt with the fate of the world and stuff like that, whereas, The Hobbit was just about a bunch of dwarves and their adventures as they encounter many obstacles as they try to reach their underground kingdom. And, I think there's no shame in that. I would have been personally fine with a smaller scaled film. Just being larger does not automatically mean good, and just being smaller doesn't automatically mean bad. But unfortunately, I felt Peter Jackson tried too hard to make this smaller story into something that was just as epic as The Lord of the Rings, and it made everything the dwarves did seem kind of insignificant in comparison. It drawed too much attention to the differences. But the reason why I preferred The Hobbit over The Two Towers and Return of the King was it brought back the magic that The Fellowship had. It exhausted exotic worlds, and that were far more interesting than Rohan and Gondor. I loved each and every location, every set. I loved how it focused more on the different races and not just humans. It had that sense of adventure that I was really yearning for. So I liked The Hobbit just as much as the other films, even though it's not as good. So now we finally, I'm sorry, it's been a little long getting into this, we get to the second Hobbit movie. Boy, this is not going to be easy to review. I decided to do a written version, which you might want to read if you want a more coherent review, but I want you to really consider everything I say, and hopefully I'll explain everything adequately. On an objective level, I'd say The Hobbit is just as good as its predecessor. Now, for those who disliked The Hobbit, don't automatically give up, because The Hobbit 2 is very different in its presentation. And I will say that if you did not like the original trilogy, and especially if you did not like The Hobbit, I'd say there's actually a good chance you will appreciate this one much more. But I'll get into why in a bit. First, let's talk about the easy stuff, the special effects. Everything that you want out of a Lord of the Rings movie in terms of spectacle, The Hobbit 2 delivers in spades. The acting is just as good as it's always been. I was thrilled to see that Thorin is much more compelling as a character than he was in the first film. The actor actually gets a lot more room to act, and I was very split about him in the first movie because I liked how he had a dignified presence, which you usually don't see with dwarves, but he was also just kind of boring. I mean, there's just too many scenes of him just staring off into the horizon, and that got old after a while. But here he gets to showcase more of a personality. He has a stronger character arc, and he was just an all-around. He had a lot more charisma too. I could definitely see this guy as a leader. But I enjoyed watching him a lot more, and also certain other characters I felt were able to showcase more personality. I can't still remember the majority of their names, but it's a step up from the first one. Now, I did feel that Bilbo himself was underutilized. In the first movie, he did have a character arc to where he does grow. Here, not so much. I felt like they were doing a little bit more with Thorin and more of the supporting cast. Even his whole dilemma with the ring is just kind of glanced over. Bilbo does still have a major impact on the story, but in terms of his characterization, there just wasn't as much for him to do compared to the first film. But the acting is great all around. I loved seeing all these guys. And the supporting cast, well, I'll talk a little bit more about them later. But then the special effects are amazing, predictably. I thought the CGI was mostly flawless. There was a lot of design put into the various creatures of Middle-earth, some old ones and some new touches to old monsters. Then the sets and locations are superb as always. Just like the first Hobbit, I was enamored with every single place these characters entered. But also what really impressed me was a lot of these monsters had personalities, which you usually don't see with these kinds of beasts. Like, for example, there are these giant spiders, and they were very, very well done. They were very freaky. I am afraid of spiders myself, at least the ones that could harm me. But when they get this big, and Peter Jackson loves really having fun with showcasing the size of these creatures, so you always seem to get them in the same shots with the characters, and it just makes them seem so much larger than life. But they have moments where you do see that they aren't just mindless beasts. At one point, Bilbo can even decipher what the spiders are saying, and I thought that was pretty cool compared to, Shelob, or whatever her name was from The Return of the King. It was an impressive special effect, but that it was more of a special effect than a character. But the real accomplishment is the dragon, Smaug himself. Besides, once again, being incredibly huge and imposing, I love how they give Smaug his own personality. He's very witty and sophisticated, but also very cruel and dangerous. And the back and forth between him and Bilbo was just, I was on the edge of my seat. Even though that's kind of a silly thing to say. But I was biting my nails and all that shit. I was really into it when they were conversing. So I really enjoyed that. And I guess that's really all I have to say on that level. The action is very exciting as always, and it's pretty inventive in certain areas too. Like I love the when they're in the barrels going down the river, there's a lot of interesting ways they film these action scenes. Like the camera's partially submerged, never to the point where you can't tell what's going on screen, but it really adds just a different dimension to the whole spectacle of it. I loved that, and the fight scenes involving Legolas and stuff like that, are still over the top and crazy as always. Peter Jackson really loves making this character, what's the term they refer to it as, Gary Stu or something like that, to where he's just so obnoxiously perfect and awesome that it does actually become kind of a problem. It's not at least as over the top as it was in Return of the King. I actually really agreed with the nostalgia critics' observations when it came to that, but it's still pretty insane. So yeah, everything that I wanted out of a Lord of the Rings movie, I got. But where things became a little different, and I'm going to be as neutral as I can possibly be in regards to describing this, because you will either like it or dislike it. So you just have to really consider what I'm saying. Okay, so as I said, the original trilogy, they were all leisurely paced. They knew when to speed up, when they knew when to slow down, and when you're doing a slower pacing, you're emphasizing the mood or atmosphere or the character's inner struggle or whatever that criticky nonsense is. And then if you're fast paced, you're emphasizing action and intensity and excitement. I don't believe either is better than the other. It's just a matter of strategy. I love Once Upon a Time in the West, which is a really slow-paced film, and I love The Expendables, which is a very fast-paced film. But The Hobbit, as I said, it was much, much slower than the original trilogy, and to the point where occasionally it would become boring. Well, this movie does the total opposite. Of all the Lord of the Rings movies, this one moves the fastest by far. It's really one action set piece after another. And so it's like starts off with a chase scene, and then that moves into a fight scene, and then there's a scary scene, and leads to another fight scene. I mean, they go from fighting giant spiders to escaping from Cell in the Elvish land. I can't remember what any of these locations were actually called. And then there's a fight scene as they're breaking out. Then the orcs come, and now they're fighting the orcs, and now they have to sneak into a town. It's just one scene like that after another. Whereas the other films would always stop and slow down to let the audience know what these characters are feeling as they express their feelings and gaze onto the horizon and all that nonsense. This one never has time to do that. It's just one intense or scary or action scene following the other. And the good news is it's at least different. And if you found the other films to be boring, I'd be surprised if you found this one to be boring, because like I said, the action scenes are phenomenal as always, and it moves so quickly that the first word that pops into my head when I think of The Hobbit 2 is entertaining. Now, that is a very subjective term, but that's just what I feel. I honestly liked it more than not because it was a change of pace above everything. I'm glad that it's not just doing the same kind of slow burn build that the previous films did. To me, it made this film stick out more. If they tried to emulate what they've done before in terms of its pacing, I think whether it was enjoyable or not, it wouldn't have stood out at all. Especially considering this is the middle portion of the story, and it's very easy to get lost in the shuffle because they don't resolve most of the subplots. Smaug is still going to be around for the third film, and of course they're building up to this necromancer thing. So presumably that's going to be the movie that really stands out. And even The Two Towers had Helm's Deep, but this film, to me, the change of pace is what gave it its identity. Otherwise, it would have just been lost in the shuffle. Now the downside is a lot of the supporting cast, there's no real time to get to learn these people. Like I enjoyed them because of the actors' performances. Like the Bard, I can't think of the actor's name. what was the last movie? I saw him last in The Raven. I really like the actor, and he makes this character entertaining, but you kind of want more of him. You want to understand more about this guy. Then the most notorious aspect of this film is they bring in Legolas, and he's in this love triangle that's kind of stupid, but even though it didn't really add anything and it was awkwardly written, the actors sold it much better than I would have expected. I liked I can't think of her name either. Evangeline Lilly. She's the chick from Lost, and I thought she did a good performance. I really do like her. I'd love to see her in more movies. And then the guy who plays the dwarf, he also I thought did really well. And I had to give credit to Orlando Bloom. I've never been a big fan of his. In fact, I've always felt Legolas was always an overrated character because he's not a character as much as he's a prop who delivers action sequences. And while those are admittedly really cool action sequences, they don't really have any room for him to act. And that's what I felt throughout the entire trilogy. Then afterwards, seeing Orlando Bloom appear in other movies, I came to the conclusion that Orlando Bloom just doesn't have that much of a personality. He doesn't have a whole lot of charisma, which is strange because whenever I see him in interviews, he is very entertaining. Now, every once in a while, he will surprise me. I thought he was pretty fun in that Three Musketeers movie. And I did enjoy him more than not in the Pirates of the Caribbean films, even that, very uneven. I enjoyed him more in the second one than the other films. I don't know why. But here, they actually make Legolas into a character, and he's kind of an asshole. He's not a very likable person. He's very crude. He's very violent. He's very jealous. And one thing I also liked about this movie is that the elves are presented in a more negative light than they have been in the past. In the other movies, they really emphasized, how they're very graceful and beautiful. Here, you get the impression that, they're kind of racist. Yeah, they definitely are physically attractive, but they look down on other people's, and they're just kind of snobs, and you even see them getting plastered at one point, which I thought was kind of cool. They made the elves more, ironically, human than previous films did. But, Legolas is kind of a jerk, and you do see an arc as he does ultimately decide to help these guys out, even though they aren't focusing on it too much, and I like that. I feel like you could see this character evolving to the more nicer Legolas that we'd get in Lord of the Rings, and even though, which is impressive considering that, once again, he isn't in the movie that much. He's in it quite a bit, but he's not, I wouldn't say he's one of the main characters. So that's, once again, all I have to say, but so you might either miss the slower pacing, you might feel that they're dumbing down the Lord of the Rings movies by making it more of an action-oriented film. Once again, there isn't enough time dedicated to a lot of the supporting characters, and that is very noticeable. But at the same time, you might, if you thought the other films were too slow, you will appreciate this new approach, and that's what I want to emphasize above everything. And I liked it more than not because I just liked how it was different compared to what we had gotten before. So that's really all I have to say. There are some corny moments, like I thought Sauron's "the strongest light can never overcome the darkness" line was really stupid. But I also liked how they designed Sauron. Once again, like in the previous films, he was more of a force of nature, whereas here, he's more of a character. And I like how his design, it's just like strings of darkness, really. But it's kind of cool, and they also showcase, they use his design from the beginning of Fellowship and mix that in with the whole eye that would become, the face of Sauron in a sense with the other films. I thought that was kind of neat. So I really enjoyed myself. I think that if you liked the other movies, including The Hobbit, definitely check this out. But if you liked the original trilogy but didn't care for The Hobbit, you should also, I think, check this out in theaters. Like I said, it does enough things differently that you, I think, will appreciate it a lot more. And if you didn't like the original trilogy, I don't know, maybe you might want to go ahead and wait till it comes out on DVD, but that's up to you. I can't really say either way. I saw it on IMAX, and I loved watching this movie on IMAX. You get so much more detail in the special effects. I had a little bit difficulty early on focusing. It seemed like every time the camera would move, it would be very blurry, but either that just stopped over time or I got used to it to where my eyes adjusted. That might have had something to do with the 40 frames per second thing. I still don't really understand what it's all about, but I heard similar complaints in regards to the first film, so maybe that's it. The 3D I thought was really good too. It seemed like this film was, like the first one was more atmospheric with the 3D, but there were a few moments that did stand out. But this film seemed like when they did the action scenes, they had the 3D in mind. So there's a lot more stuff shooting out of the screen like fire. That was what got me to cringe the most. So I thought that was really well utilized too. So check it out if you'd like to read my written review. Please look at the link in my description. I have also done written reviews of, I should have had this up, I'm sorry, Bulletproof Monk, a Chow Yun-Fat action film that sucks, so don't watch the movie, but go ahead and read the review, please. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original one, The Colony, which is a new post-apocalyptic thriller, The Possession, a modern-day ghost film, which sucks, the Vampires The Turning, which is kickboxing versus vampires, so that's kind of cool, so check those out. What did you think about this Twinkie Maker? It didn't care for it as much. It preferred the slower pacing of the earlier films. So not everybody is going to agree about The Hobbit. So I made this nonsensical skit actually worth something. It meant something. So that is all. I hope you enjoyed this video. I apologize for the length, and I'll see you guys later.